Look at the muscles on you.
How's it going, everybody? The corpse of King Minos here. So I think it's about time that I even talk about this video in an actual video rather than in just like a random, like, you know, live stream or something along those lines. It's been at least a hot minute since I've even seen this video, but it's surprising to think that it's quite literally only been about 2 weeks since this video has even existed. But it's a video that is quite possibly the pinnacle of just absolute Bloodborne copium. The simple fact that Sony even, like, addresses the fact that Bloodborne even exists, but continues to never bother to even remaster it, or even release it on PC, or really just anything, any kind of news relating to Bloodborne whatsoever, is of course one of the greatest crimes in gaming history, second only to Sony completely fucking over the entirety of Helldivers 2 for basically at least a good, like, I don't know, 10% of the community. But overall, we basically have a video here that goes by the title of Bloodborne Doesn't Need a Remaster, and to say that this is one of the most confusing messes of a video that I've ever seen would definitely be a tad bit of an understatement. So without any further ado, let us sit back, relax, grab some popcorn, and let's just dive right in.
Just hear me out. Bloodborne. This cosmic Victorian Gothic horror masterpiece came out back in March of 2015. The Born in Soulsborne. It was developed by From Software and their resident mastermind, Hidetaka Miyazaki. That's my boy right there. And if you have a Bloodborne fan in your life, you already know. It's got the art direction, the terrifyingly beautiful bosses, the trick weapons, not a single one of which is bad, by the way, the level design, the story, the dogs, the crows, crow dogs, dog crows, this thing, those random aliens in the forest, an orphan, a random god-tier castle zone you can only get to by carriage, a bunch of really badass women, the best DLC ever made, and a revolutionary combat system that rewards aggression and would go on to inspire an entire subgenre of Souls-likes. And it all runs at 30 frames per second.
Alright, well, I mean, with all that kind of stuff, why wouldn't you want this to at least run at like 60 frames per second? Or at least even just be released on like PC or something like that. Like, I get it, there's people like trying to at least like, they're at least like trying to emulate Bloodborne and whatnot, and hopefully that project actually goes through, because unfortunately, if Sony isn't going to create a goddamn port for a game like this, or even Shadow of the Colossus, which was genuinely one of the biggest disappointments I think I've ever come across, was the fact that Shadow of the Colossus wasn't even on fucking Steam, then we might as well just fucking emulate it at this point. Fuck you, Sony, for basically cucking out a major part of the fucking, of the fucking video game community that regularly plays the Soulsborne franchise.
And yet, without fail, every time I stream the game, there's at least one person who comes in and says,
I don't know about this game. I'll probably just wait till they release it at 60 FPS.
And my heart breaks, because everyone deserves to experience this.
Okay, and who's saying that you cannot experience that at 60 frames per second? No, please, tell me, who says that you can't experience that at 60 frames per second? And no, you cannot use yourself as an example.
Really though, the desire for Bloodborne running at double its frame rate has turned into something of a phenomenon in the gaming community. I mean, just a couple weeks ago, the one and only Ben Starr said this, completely unprompted, at the Golden Joystick Awards.
Absolutely criminal that we don't have an official version of Bloodborne running at 60 frames per second.
Yeah, and I really wonder what's wrong with that particular quote. I mean, I can understand how it feels weird with it coming out unprompted, maybe, but, like, again, what exactly is wrong here? Like, Bloodborne is universally considered as, like, one of the greatest of the From Software, lineup of Soulsborne games, and yet apparently it not only doesn't even have a PC port officially, but it also doesn't even run at fucking 60 frames per second because of the hardware that it's stuck on. Yeah, that is just straight up fucking criminal that it doesn't have an official 60 frames per second port whatsoever.
And even if it's not tomorrow, it makes sense that they would give us an official Bloodborne PC port, remake, remaster, sequel, anything tangentially related to Bloodborne. Any of that could be announced at the Game Awards next week.
Yeah, unfortunately, that kind of aged poorly. There was literally no Bloodborne news when it ever came to the Game Awards. But of course, we also got some pretty good ads for an Elden Ring sequel at the very least, and also an AI-generated cat game ad.
But amidst everyone, myself included, asking whether we could achieve 60 FPS, no one stopped to consider whether we should.
What is this? No. Like, here's the thing, okay? If a game is locked at a certain frame rate, it already suffers quite a bit, okay? Like, not only is it locked at that particular frame rate, but when it comes to a game like Bloodborne or any kind of Souls-like where you need a certain level of precision reaction time in order to avoid getting completely screwed over by whatever in the hell is directly in front of you, the fact that it's locked at such a low frame rate already kind of hinders your ability to even be able to actually react to stuff like that. Like for games like, Elden Ring, the fact that it runs at a nice 60 frames per second for me kind of helps me dodge a little bit better. If it were running at 30 frames per second, it would be a little bit more difficult because, well, I mean, it just not only wouldn't look that good, but on top of that too, it also heightens your reaction time in some ways. It's a lot of weird like science and whatnot that I personally don't really understand myself because I'm not exactly like a big technology guy, but from what I've heard, whenever it comes to higher frame rates, they actually do in fact lead to higher reaction times whenever it comes to games that, well, require heightened reaction times. And for a game like Bloodborne that rewards you for having good reaction time and playing aggressively, this is the one fucking Soulsborne game that would require a 60 frames per second remaster at the very fucking least.
I'm not afraid to say it. I think Bloodborne is at its best at its native 30 FPS.
This is like a level of like Bloodborne copium that I haven't actually seen before.
It simply doesn't need a 60 frame per second remaster. Here's why. But first, let's talk frame rate, because what even is 30 FPS? Well, when you see a video like this one, it's not technically a moving picture. It's 30 still images all jammed into 1 second, and our brains stitch them together to give the illusion that they're moving. Take a game in 60 FPS and you're jamming 60 frames into that same singular second. What ends up happening is, with more frames to work with per second, our brains can create a smoother image.
And on top of that too, have a better reaction time. The fact that you're using Elden Ring as the example right here is probably the biggest way that you can shoot yourself in the foot whenever it comes to this particular point.
Some research says the human eye sees something around 70 FPS, but other research says closer to 40. And even then, the idea of a biological FPS is really hard to study, and it's really not comparable to an FPS on a computer monitor. But those sort of ballpark estimates, they do make sense with how we perceive varying kinds of media. Like movies, for instance, are shown at just 24 frames per second. Most of us don't think twice about that. It's just how movies are supposed to look. But
yeah, that's largely because of the fact that, well, one, they're movies. They're not an interactive medium. Like, they're fine being at a lower frame rate. It allows them to, I guess, just kind of make things look a lot better. Like, if you've ever seen, like, those, like, frame rate enhancement videos of, like, people, trying to increase the frame rate of, like, certain movies or, animations or stuff like that. And I know that she gets into this a little bit later, but that, like, those kinds of things look jank as fuck. Like, there's a reason why. It's largely because they weren't made to be at that higher frame rate, okay? They just weren't made to be at that higher frame rate, and it realistically does't have to be at that higher frame rate because, again, you're not really interacting with it outside of just looking at it, watching it, and either being, semi-engaged with the story that it's trying to tell you, or being bored out of your fucking skull because modern movies kind of suck.
Then they showed us The Hobbit at 48 frames per second. And we kind of lost our minds. It looked all wrong. Too smooth. And why? Why does it look bad with more frames, even to us gamers? Some folks think it's because 48 frames crosses over into IRL territory. It's more similar to how our own brains and eyeballs see real life.
A lot of this is starting to come across as a bunch of hypothetical stuff. Until you actually start making a proper point, then we're just going to be skipping over a lot of this stuff. Like, fucking eyeball frame rates. This is the current level that we're at. Eyeball frame rates.
Also, consider Avatar. Parts of the new one were shot and shown at that doubled 48 frames per second. And while it wasn't as big of a deal as the Hobbit fiasco, folks generally weren't a fan of 48 FPS here either. Some even saying it looks like a video game. So yeah, frame rate in movies and TV definitely affects how we perceive what's on screen. But what about video games? I'd argue the same is true.
What? Okay, so you literally just brought up a point earlier, like not even 30 fucking seconds ago, where someone pointed out that certain parts of the Avatar movie, because they were shot at 48 frames per second, looked like a video game. Meanwhile, apparently you think that it's meanwhile, you think that's also applicable to video games, where a lower frame rate is better. I'm sorry, but like, please don't tell me that that is going to be your actual fucking logic, because I'm actually going to lose my mind if that is the case.
And sure, From Software certainly didn't intend to put Bloodborne at 30 FPS just to make it more cinematic and dreamlike. The processors in that base PS4 and the X-Bone were, not great. But if you watch movies like I do, the effect is still there, that cinematic veil. And really, out of all of From Software's titles, Bloodborne would be the one to run at 30 instead of 60.
What? No, I'm actually legitimately confused. What the fuck does any of that actually mean? What does that mean? Like, again, I already brought up earlier how a higher frame rate would actually help the performance of the fucking game, especially for a game that is as aggressive as Bloodborne. Are we just forgetting about that one? Oh, I'm sorry, you just want your fucking cinematic feel in these fucking video games. Jesus Christ. This is actually just straight up like Sony fanboy logic. What the fuck is this?
It's weirder, grittier, and quite literally more dreamlike than something more classically fantasy like Dark Souls. And honestly, when I played Lance's 60 FPS mod after logging hundreds of hours of the game at 30 FPS, it did feel unnerving and kinda wrong. It was kinda like, Uncanny Valley, or like seeing your teacher at the grocery store. It wasn't the Yharnam I knew.
Okay, and this is your own subjective opinion. Why are you trying to turn this into why it objectively doesn't even need a remaster? This is the problem that I have with a lot of these kinds of people. They will use their own subjectivity as a way to like create their own objective, like, points or something like that. And it just never fucking works, because it's just literally like, okay, that's a you thing. That's not everybody else's thing. Stop trying to fuck over other people just because you don't like it.
Keep Yharnam weird. Let it be this fake cinematic wonderland.
I mean, let's put it this way. Fucking Elden Ring is a weird fucking place, especially when it comes to the Land of Shadow. Have you seen the shit that happens over there? Are you gonna start saying that just because the Land of Shadow is a weird dreamlike area that it should be running at 30 fucking frames per second? Yeah, I didn't think so.
Want it to be real. Keep Yahar'gul right where it is. Put that thing back where it came from, or so help me. No, but Lance's mod is truly awesome. It's just, the weirdness is my fault.
I have special eyes.
But it's got me thinking about something bigger. Why are we conditioned to think 60 FPS is the best? Is it actually the best?
Yeah, because it not only runs smoother, but it also allows for tighter reaction times. As I already mentioned before, I do not like repeating myself in these videos, and it's really getting to that annoying part where I'm repeating myself way too much for my own enjoyment.
Should every single game be cramming those 60 frames into every single second? There's a decently large handful of games that run better at 30 FPS than 60.
I swear to God, if your examples are going to be RPG games, so help me God.
Final Fantasy XVI, in which Ben Starr plays the lead, might I add, runs a heck of a lot better at 30 than 60, as evidenced by the recent PC release this year.
Okay, well, that wasn't exactly the point that I expected, but somehow this one is even worse, because you just stated that apparently, because it runs at 60 frames per second, then that's why that Final Fantasy game went poorly. When the article that you literally show off literally states that it requires something else externally to hit 60 frames per second because of poor optimization for the PC port. How can you fuck up your point that badly? Like, this is a level of fucking up your point that I didn't even think was possible.
Also, the beautifully cinematic Red Dead Redemption 2 is locked at 30 frames per second on console, and some gamers even say that the horse feels floaty and weird at 60 frames.
Again, those are some players, that's not literally everybody whenever it comes to Red Dead Redemption 2. I haven't really played the game myself, maybe I'll see if I can even get my hands on it, but I'm pretty sure it's like fucking $50 and I won't have that kind of money for the next 3 months.
And I'm not even gonna get into the weirdness that has Skyrim Skyrim at a high frame rate.
Okay, allow me to explain something, because somebody within my own friend group actually explained this during the live stream in which we covered this. Skyrim at a higher frame rate actually functions weird, largely because of the engine that it runs on. The engine and the physics of said engine basically all rely on the frame rate, okay? The reason why Skyrim has to run at a lower frame rate is purely because if it runs at a higher frame rate, the physics completely fuck up. That has nothing to do with 60 frames per second ruining video games or ruining the feel of video games. It is literally just because Skyrim's engine is completely fucked. That has... Why would you use Skyrim of all examples? Why would you use Skyrim of all examples? Like, probably the only reason why I would think that you would bring up Skyrim is probably because you don't know about this. And if you don't know about this, there you go. There's your information about this, okay? Skyrim's physics are tied to its frame rate, and that's why it acts like shit.
For games that can run at both or higher, we're often faced with choosing a frame rate based on stability. And I think most of us would agree that a stable 30 is way better than an unstable 60. And that's one frame-related criticism that I'm actually on board with regards to Bloodborne. Sometimes it dips below 30, and that's not very chill. But in a game about Lovecraftian horrors and losing our minds as we perceive eldritch truths, what are those dropped frames but the filling of our IRL frenzy bars?
I get that this part is probably meant to be as like a joke, but I genuinely feel like I don't even think... I genuinely don't even think I have the patience to watch through the rest of this bullshit. We're just gonna round off the video right here. So, what exactly have we learned today? Well, apparently we've learned that Bloodborne doesn't need a remaster because it needs that cinematic, dreamlike feel for whatever reason. And according to one person's own experience with a 60 frames per second mod, it looks weird. When most other people who have played Bloodborne, and those who haven't even played Bloodborne like myself, can look at Bloodborne and think to themselves, you know, this would probably be a lot better at 60. But anyways, guys, that's going to do it for today's video. If you guys enjoyed today's video, please consider leaving a like. That's very well appreciated. Leave a comment down below what you thought about the video, what you want me to talk about next. And also subscribe to the channel if you're new and you want to see more content such as this. And also go ahead and follow me on Blue Sky, join the Discord server, and of course special thanks to my channel members. Also, if you made it to this point in the video, go ahead and comment, I don't know, Moonlight Greatsword, because, I don't know, that just sounds funny. But yeah, anyways guys, it's been Sadie, and have yourselves a nice day.